Welcome to Girls Gone Wellness, Crystal.
Yay, I'm so excited to be here.
We're so excited to have you. We both think what you're doing is so cool. I can't wait to jump in and talk more about it. ADHD is a really cool conversation. We had one guest on and we talked a little bit about it. And it was the first time that we had had that conversation. And it was interesting to see how many people were like, oh, we need to talk about this more. So it's going to be great today. I'd love to start with you just kind of telling us a little bit about your journey with ADHD. I know you're open about it on social media. We'd love for you to
hmm
talk about that here and tell us about how you started Shimmer.
Yeah, awesome. And I don't know when this will air, but it's actually Neurodiversity Celebration Week this week. So it's good
Oh,
timing
Awesome.
if you want to look that up. But yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me. I'm really excited about this. And I'm really excited that you guys are excited about the topic of ADHD. It's something that is so prevalent to and people are starting to understand it, especially women, because a lot of women like myself, we get diagnosed when we're adults. And we'll get into all the reasons afterwards. So I think it's really important to have this conversation in like a casual lens. But for me, so I grew up as like that kid that was bouncing off of the walls. So I actually did have pretty stereotypical looking ADHD. I was always getting like kicked out of classes. All of my teachers hated me. But I never got a diagnosis. And for me, it actually wasn't because of the woman part. It was because of like the Asian part. My family just like, if you have an Asian family, you just like mental health is not the first thing. It's more of like, okay, discipline and like, or just like try harder or whatever it is. So I didn't get exposed to ADHD until I was like 27 or 28. And I was in the US and a lot of my friends had ADHD diagnoses, a lot of my guy friends. And they started basically like noticing things in me and just like making one-off comments. And I didn't think that much of it until I started a business. And when I started a business, basically like all of my structure that was imposed on me through school, through my old corporate jobs, everything kind of like fell apart. And not only did it fall apart for me, but I was like, oh wow, there are other people also expecting me to put structure on them. And so I was like, in my mind, like kind of like failing on two levels. And so all those, it kind of like all was like a perfect storm because there's obviously like TikTok and Instagram, the algorithms start getting you once you start looking into it. And then my friends are telling me more. They're like, oh, all these things that you're talking about, they're very common with ADHD, things around disorganization, things around like time blindness that I used to like just cram everything at the last minute and it would be fine in school if you're smart, but it doesn't really work in adult life, especially when other people are involved. So that's what really brought me to get my diagnosis. It was like more or less a mix of more awareness, more information, and like it had already been spinning in my head, paired with like things falling apart. And unfortunately, that is generally how it happens for a lot of people. There's like something that's falling apart. And then it's when it like hurts enough for you to take these steps, especially if you have ADHD, because it's a lot of steps. It's a lot of steps to get a diagnosis and it's a lot of steps to
mhm.
get support. So you really need to like need it bad enough to be and have the information at that time to be able to take those steps. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I know that like when we think about ADHD, still to this day, there's like two kind of things we see. We see like the old conversation of like it's the little boys with like behavioral issues running around and you can't control them and whatever. And then it's the other people who are like, "Oh, it's I have ADHD," but they don't. Maybe they're just struggling in one area or whatever it is. And so sometimes it's hard to really understand like what does adult ADHD look like in like day-to-day life? Can you kind of paint a picture for us?
Yeah, it's interesting too because ADHD is one of those things where when people see the memes or like the TikToks and stuff, you're like, oh yeah, like me too. So it
Mhm,
really confuses people because the symptoms are really relatable, but
mhm,
where it becomes ADHD and why it like makes so many ADHDers angry when people say things like, oh, like me too, is because it's like yeah, maybe you resonate with that like micro moment that you see on Instagram. And it's not like Instagram's fault. Like you can only show micro moments on Instagram. But like
yeah,
imagine if you were not just losing your keys, but like you were losing everything right when you needed it, and then you're like late for your job interview because you don't have your thing, and you're like stressed because you don't have your other thing, and then you show up and you botch your interview, and then you don't get the job you want. And like imagine that just happening like day after day after day. And
Mm.
so it's like it's the compounding effect of all of these symptoms plus like the severity of it that actually makes it ADHD. So like to get a diagnosis, you not only have to just like relate to the symptoms, you have to have a certain amount of them, like a percentage of them. And then you also, it has to impair you in multiple areas of your life. So when you go through the diagnosis, like they'll check all of that. Um, but aside from that, like basically what it looks like in adults is there's three types. So there's inattentive ADHD, there's hyperactive ADHD, and then there's combined type, which is simply put, just like you check enough boxes out of the first two. And so I have combined type,
Mhm.
luckily or unluckily, which luckily makes me able to talk about all of it, but unluckily means I have to face all of the symptoms. But basically, hyperactivity when you're a kid is like that bouncing off of walls, but it looks a little bit different in adults and often looks different in women because women are masking and they're just showing up differently and they have perfectionism and other things that are in the mix. But for hyperactivity in adults, it often looks more like maybe you're fidgety, like with your leg. That's one common symptom. Or maybe your mind is always racing, or you make decisions really quickly and you don't really think through the consequences. Um, or or you just like you feel like there's like this motor and you're always running faster than you're able to like process things. So that's on the hyperactivity side, which does look different from bouncing off of the walls. And so a lot of women are like, oh, I'm not bouncing off the walls, therefore I don't have hyperactive
Mm.
ADHD. And then inattentive, as a kid, usually looks like you're daydreaming in class. And often women will have inattentive ADHD. So you don't really get caught by the teacher as much as like the boy who's maybe bouncing off the wall. And that's part of the reason why the diagnosis um, is often missed. But as an adult, it could look like you are trying really hard to keep track of a conversation, but you somehow just lose the plot in the middle of it and it's really important to the other person. And then you don't want to look like you're a bad friend or a bad partner. And then you end up just not saying anything and hoping that you catch up. Or you working memory is a big piece. Like you aren't able to remember important details from people who really matter and events that really matter. So those things will show up. A lot of it is just more internal. And then when you have combined, you kind of have to deal with like all of them and depending on like your job and your life and it will show up a little bit differently, so they will look different contextually, and that's why it's sometimes really difficult to diagnose ADHD, especially if you're like of a different culture, of a different age, you've been masking a different amount, there's like so many variables that come into play.
That was a great explanation. I've never heard anyone talk about it that thoroughly, so thank you for that. I you pointed out something really important earlier that I want to talk about briefly, but I think it's so true when you were saying earlier that a lot of people, maybe they'll have corporate jobs or 9 to 5 and they'll have this structure in their life. They'll go through school, they'll go through, a 9 to 5, they'll have all these things, but for women or anyone really who is entrepreneurial and they start their own business and then they have to create their own structure and then they're like, oh, now what? Do you find that that's like very common for, I mean, women that have ADHD that start their own businesses and then they have this whole like aha moment? Do you see that a lot?
Yeah, I feel very passionately about entrepreneurship and ADHD because I think that ADHDers have like all the like the good things that entrepreneurs need, like the risk taking, the
Yeah.
maybe thinking, the doing before thinking can sometimes be good as an entrepreneur, the creativity, the like nonlinear thinking, the seeing things that other people might not see, the hyperactivity and like the ability to hyper focus on something that matters to you, like all of those things make people really good entrepreneurs, make ADHDers really good entrepreneurs. But I think on the flip side, we also have a lot of things that make it really difficult for us to not have structure and not have a boss. And the reason why I feel so passionately about it is because it's this unique opportunity where like if you can support the people, whether it's through coaching or anything, but you can, if you can support the parts that are hard for them and they're not spending all of their time just looking at the parts that's hard for them, and instead they're able to really like foster and like make the parts of them that are them and that are really great and makes them different, and be able to focus on those and grow those things. And why our whole, I kind of forgot to answer your part about the platform in Shimmer, but why our whole platform is like built off of strength-based development is because so much of ADHDers will just spend all the time on the former. Like they'll spend all the time trying to fix their weaknesses, and trying to make all of that like up to par, rather than focusing on what actually will make them a great entrepreneur or a great whatever it is that they are. So yes, there are so many ADHD entrepreneurs. We make great entrepreneurs when we
Yeah.
are supported in the correct way.
Mhm.
But also, I will also point out that I think it's tough when there's narratives of like ADHDers make great X, because then it puts a lot of pressure on people who maybe aren't entrepreneurial. So I say that I do think ADHDers make great entrepreneurs, but also like there are ADHDers who also aren't entrepreneurial. So like if that doesn't work for you, also like don't feel pressured of like, why can other people do that and I can't?
Mhm.
Definitely. I think it's a good reminder to people who are neurodivergent that like you can do all of these things. In fact, you could be really good in those areas. But yeah, I get that because I do hear a lot of people say like actually, and I think that there's a positive here. Like it's a gift to have this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you also don't want to place that pressure on someone who maybe has no interest in having that sort of trajectory for their life either. um it's funny, this conversation goes with this, but also our podcast is, we're just like very known for like we'll go all over the place with the conversation. So let's actually talk about Shimmer since we didn't yet. But yeah, tell us a little bit about it so that when we're going forward and talking more, like people kind of know like what it is that you do.
Yeah, so I mentioned when I got diagnosed, and I don't know if anyone's watching video or not, but I am Asian. And so when I was diagnosed, and this is like a common Asian experience, why I say this is that we kind of grew up not being told not to take Western medication, like as the first line of
Mhm.
defense. And that was like kind of ingrained in my head. And so when I got diagnosed, and my psychiatrist basically said, like, okay, here's your diagnosis paper. This is what it means. Here's 10 milligrams of Adderall. Just come back when you want more. And I was like, whoa, whoa, like, what are my other options? And she
Mhm.
was like, oh, just like take this, and like we're running out of time, kind of thing. And it's not her fault. Like now I know that there's like, I've learned a lot more about why the system is set up that way. But at the
Mhm.
time, I was kind of like flabbergasted by that. And so I went down a rabbit hole, and I discovered this thing called ADHD coaching, which is now like one of the products in our platform. And it was just like such a gong show. Like everything was really expensive. Everyone had like all these different websites with different offerings, and like everyone who I talked to as a consultation would like try to sell me on what they were doing, and it just like didn't feel good. And so like we basically in the beginning just started, I got a coach, and then I got another coach because more people started coming, and that just started matching people. So in the beginning, there wasn't even really like a tech. It was just like a lot of people who wanted coaching and then coaches. And then over time, that kind of grew into, I guess it's now like a tech enabled platform. So we have over 50 coaches. We've done now 100,000 sessions, which is pretty
Wow.
wild. Of just ADHDers, mostly adults, a little bit of teens, but mostly adults with ADHD coaches. And over time, it's just really evolved to continue. Like whenever I needed something and our members needed something, we would just build it. So now there's also like all these learning modules. We have body doubling, which is basically like co-working with other ADHDers. So we have multiple of those a day to like get your work done. And then recently in January, we also built like a separate, completely free AI support tool. So it's kind of like it does two things. It like helps you set better goals, and then it provides the like tools and the scaffolding to help you reach those goals. And so I care a lot about accessibility, and I've always wanted to create something that's completely free for the community. So we've finally done enough on the coaching side, and we are able to like take some of those profits there and then put it basically into this free app. And so now within like a week of launch, we now have like 25,000 people who are on that app, which is pretty exciting.
Wow.
And yeah, so like I'm just excited to continue growing the offerings for ADHDers, and the vision kind of here is to like create one place where you can get like all of your ADHD stuff, and it feels empowering rather than just like a medical thing only.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. That's so incredible. Me and Vic just graduated from naturopathic medical school last year, actually, and we had our clinical year in our last year. And I worked with a few people that had ADHD. And I think like naturopathic and integrative medicine can do a lot, but I always felt at the end of my visits like, oh, like I just wish there was more support I could offer them like outside of the appointment, because it goes so much
Mm-hmm.
further than like giving them a medication or giving them a supplement and like giving them maybe some like tips and like sending them on their way, as you know,
Yeah.
obviously. So
Mhm.
this is just so incredible and I can't wait to, share it with my future patients and our listeners. I think it's so amazing. Um, you talk about AI and ADHD on your Instagram, and I think this is such an interesting conversation. I just want to like talk about it a little bit here. You use AI tools in Shimmer, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I know, well, we know obviously ADHD brains like struggle with organization, task breakdown, all of this stuff. So do you think in general, like AI tools like ChatGPT or anything like that can be helpful or harmful? And then how do you kind of integrate that into your platform? Can we talk about supplements for a second? One of the biggest issues we have with supplements that we have talked about again and again on the podcast is that people are taking them and they don't actually know why. That's why we've been loving Stay Above Nutrition lately.
First, I have to talk about their Muscle 5 protein. Developed by world renowned scientists at McMaster University, this 5-in-1 formula delivers 40 grams of protein. But that's not all. It also includes actual clinical dosages of creatine, vitamin D, and calcium. No more taking all of these supplements separately. You get them all in one scoop, and it actually tastes good.
Now let's talk about creatine, their creatine 1. It's true creatine is having its moment on social media right now, but the truth is creatine is one of the most well-researched supplements out there for strength, performance, muscle recovery, even cognitive and sleep support. 1 gram of creatine is in each pink lemonade chewable tablet, which makes getting 3 to 5 grams a day super easy.
And lastly, we have to talk about their Trim 7. We have to be clear this is not a fat burning magic pill. It's a metabolic support formula. And if you already have your basics dialed in, like your protein intake, lifting weights, getting your steps in, sleep, nutrition, something like Trim 7 can support your energy levels, appetite control, and help you show up better for your workouts. Approved by Health Canada and studied in a double blind, placebo controlled, randomized clinical trial at McMaster University. Within this clinical trial, Trim 7 induced on average a 4% fat loss over 3 months while specifically preserving muscle mass. When you have better energy, you train harder. And when you train harder, you build muscle. That's what actually changes your body composition long term.
For this month, we have partnered with Stay Above Nutrition to give our listeners 20% off their products so you can see firsthand how effective and delicious their products really are. All you have to do is use the code GGW20 at checkout. If you want to check them out, we'll link Stay Above Nutrition and the code in the show notes.
Now back to the show.
Think about like diagnosing where in this thought process is your problem, and then then we're going to look at solutions that are maybe external to you, so like environmental, and then maybe we'll look at skills that you might be gapping, and then you will make a decision based on this information that we are guiding you through. And so what we've heard, which is really cool, is like we've now heard from our members so I'm obsessed with feedback calls. Like any member who will jump on the phone with me, like I will get on the phone with them. And so one of our members was like, oh, yeah, like I found myself going through the thought process in my head when I got in a fight about XYZ reason with my husband. And I realized that I now knew how to like think through this problem. And so
Mm.
that's what we're trying to use AI to be able to do, which a coach, like a human coach in that situation, wouldn't have been able to be there in that moment where they needed that unless you're rich and can pay a lot of money for someone to follow you around, right? So I think it's like it's nuanced in that I think if AI is used thoughtfully, it can really build capacity and like offload the parts that maybe are okay to be offloaded and help you think through things that are really important for you to in terms of critical thinking and like who you want to become as a person. And so I think it is really important for platforms who have this responsibility to approach it that way. And so that's why I also think as consumers, depending on what you're looking for, you should go to more, I guess, like specialized things for specialized AI products for what
Yeah.
you need. Like sometimes you just need an answer and that's fine, but like
Yeah.
you shouldn't, not everything you just need an answer.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I love how you talked about that because I actually haven't heard anybody talk about AI from that standpoint where it's like we actually are like it's beneficial, but we are kind of forgetting how to think for ourselves and in so many different ways. Like even sometimes I have to tell myself, like, you can actually send an email without using AI.
Yeah.
Like it's okay. And like even we had a guest actually recently say that they appreciated that our questions weren't like obvious AI questions because they were used to getting a bunch of just AI generated questions for a podcast.
Yeah.
And it made me sad because this is part of the joy of like having these conversations is that you've put that thought into them. So I think it's really cool that you mentioned that. And that there is nuance, just like the internet, just like social media. Like there is the
Hmm.
parts that are so, so good, as long as we're using them responsibly. So I love that. I think so. It's called Indie, right? The
Yeah,
AI.
it's INDY, and it
Okay.
stands, it's not obvious, but it stands for neurodivergent. So like ND, but we kind of made it into
Yeah.
like sounding a little bit like a name. But even that,
Indie.
like there's a lot of talk within like therapy and like clinical fields about like the negative repercussions of creating like a bond with your AI,
Right.
and that replacing real social interaction. So that's part of also
Yeah.
like why Indy's a star. Indy doesn't have pronouns. Even the way that we've trained Indy to talk, it doesn't say like I'm so proud of you. It would be like you did this. Like how do you feel about it?
Oh,
Mm.
Because we don't want people to replace people in their lives and their critical thinking, and insert whatever X here
yeah.
with the AI tool. The AI tool, and why we call it an AI tool and not a companion as well, is that it is just a tool that you can
Yeah.
use in your life.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that. I saw someone on Instagram recently say that they like named their chat GPT robot. And I was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
no, we
No,
can't
it's
be
too
naming
far.
our AI systems. No, like
Yeah,
of course, like, in this
there's
situation, yes, but not like a
yeah.
general AI tool. I'd love to know who the ideal coaching client is then. Is it someone who has a diagnosis already and they're just kind of looking for like that coaching element? Or is it someone who's like, I think I have ADHD, but I don't know? Because we did mention how like getting a diagnosis is not an easy process. So if someone thinks they have it and they want this support, like who are you? Who's that ideal client?
Yeah, so we don't require a diagnosis because we're not medical. And we like purposely have thought about like how we want to even like frame the entire company. Like we kind of sit in the middle of like healthcare, wellness, consumer product. Like we're kind of a little bit inside of everything,
Yeah.
purposefully for that reason. But you don't need to have a diagnosis. I wish I had access to Shimmer before, but the reality is like when you don't think about ADHD, like you wouldn't think about ADHD coaching, right? It just doesn't
Yeah.
happen that way.
Mhm.
But which is why we do so much work on social media and things like that. Like a lot of people who follow me on social media don't have ADHD. Maybe someone in their life does, or maybe they're just like interested in some of the tips, which are really relevant for anyone. So it's really anyone who wants to make changes in their life and wants guidance in doing so. What makes it ADHD coaching is that all of our coaches are trained to understand that it's not like a one size fit all solution. It's not like, oh, I'm struggling with this and therefore this is the answer. They are primed with understanding like how different brains work. And the cool thing about neurodiversity is like if you know neurodiversity, you also can support neurotypical people, because like the neurodiversity by definition is just like people have different brains, and like you need to be able to adapt and fit a solution or like or guidance to a brain that looks different than yours, that look different than someone else's. So yeah, it really is just like anyone who wants to make changes in their life, who wants to maybe like re-envision the direction that they're going in, they want to take the steps, and they want like empathetic support to help them through, because our coaches basically specialize in two things. They specialize in coaching, which is like helping you get better alignment, go towards a direction, break things down, and then they specialize in ADHD, which is more so like the executive dysfunction, the differences in the brain, the psychoeducation. So if you think that you don't have ADHD, um, you'll benefit from like the former part of it, and maybe even some of the latter parts of it, because people who are like neurotypical people benefit from ADHD strategies. Like it's one of those
Mhm.
things where like I forget the quote, but like the rising tides lift all boats or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So like neurodivergent solutions, neurodiversity, neurodinclusive solutions will support everyone. It's just how it's like how wheelchair ramps like support make life better for everyone. It's the
Yeah.
same thing of like neuro-inclusive design.
Absolutely. I love it. You touched earlier on this idea of masking, and I think it's really interesting. And you said that women use this technique a lot. So I would love for you to just explain what that is and how that can kind of show up.
Yeah, so basically masking is like when it could be conscious and sometimes it's unconscious, like it's just learned behavior over our life, but we basically try to like suppress the way that we naturally would do something because we think that other people expect us to be a certain way. So like basically we're expected to be normal, so we are going to like make ourselves look normal.
Mm.
And generally, I mean, everyone who like does it to some extent, because everyone obviously wants to socially fit in, but neurodivergent people will do it more because like what's been told to us is normal, is like neurotypical, is how neurotypical people act. So when you have done that your entire life, it it is one like just really exhausting, and it might be exhausting, but you don't even know it because you've been just doing it for so long. But also like it can cause a lot of like self-esteem and like identity disassociation because you don't really like know who you are underneath it all. um I'm really good at masking, like I like depending on which friend group I was in. Like I had such diverse friends, and people are like, I don't understand how you have like friend groups who like you could never put them in the same room together. Like I would be like a different person when I'm with them, and I just thought it was kind of normal. I was like, oh, everyone just does this. And but it's like it's not that normal.
Mm.
It is definitely more common for people who are neurodivergent, and it's because like ever since we were really young, we have been told by the adults around us, and then like later on the kids around us, that what we're doing is like wrong, or to like stop doing the thing that we're doing. Like there's this stat that kids under 10 who have ADHD have heard 20,000 more negative messages than non ADHD peers. And I have definitely lived through that, in terms of like the like stop, sit down, stop talking. Like it's just
Mm.
like a lot of like stops and like that you're doing something wrong. And so that like just it's natural that you'll start masking, you'll start like not acting the way that you normally would act. And then you start to just believe in other people's beliefs about you more than you can trust yourself.
Yeah, and that's so heartbreaking, right? Like that stat is so sad to me, and it's true. Like if you were taught this or told these things at a young age, like you're just going to carry that throughout your whole adult life, and that's going to leak into like your relationships and your job and all of these things.
Yes.
So it's so heartbreaking to me. I hate that.
Yeah, the relationships is a huge one. Like even today, like with all of the information and all of the coaching I've done, when I get in a fight with someone, my initial reaction is always like, "Oh, like I'm wrong." And I
Mm.
immediately like will like spiral about it. And even like when the other person will be like, "No, I realized I'm wrong." I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. Like I must be wrong." And they're like, "Why? Why do you think that?" And I was like, "Oh, because
Mm.
I'm always wrong." Like that's just
Mm.
how I think, because like you've
Yeah.
been told your entire life. So it takes like years to and a lot of work to be able to shake off all of those things and to like trust in yourself, and to believe that that you're not always wrong, that you're probably and just to like rewrite a lot of those narratives and to like redefine also this wrong. I think another thing I get in relationships a lot is like, oh, like there's no one that's like wrong here, you know. And it's like and I just don't even think that. I was like, oh, I must be wrong. I must apologize. I must like figure out what I need to do differently next time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about dating and ADHD because
Hmm.
I saw you had posted about that, like especially in the early phases of dating. And I'm just thinking, like, for people who are listening, that's something that I've never heard anybody talk about before, like dealing with ADHD in early dating. So I'd love if we could talk a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, so dating with ADHD is interesting. It also depends on your presentation. So I'm more hyperactive, I would say. Like on paper, I think I'm about the same. I don't remember like the check marks, but I think I'm more hyperactive. And a lot of the times with ADHDers, like we get really hype. It's like even with hobbies and things, we'll get really hyper focused on something that
Mm.
we're passionate and interested in. And so when you translate that to relationship, oftentimes that can look a little bit love bomby, right? So you're like in this new relationship, it's your hyper focus, like all the feelings are feeling, and you just like want to spend all of your time with this person. And so if they're not used to it, it can it can come off like a lot. And so that's one thing that ADHDers often, especially hyperactive ADHDers, often feel is like this feeling of being too much, because they've like heard that feedback of like people being like, whoa, like this is a lot. And then like it also causes a lot of problems for yourself as well, because like you have this hyper focus, you go in really hard with it, and this is like hobbies as well. And then you, it, that feeling doesn't last forever. And so you suddenly don't feel that intense feeling anymore. And then you're like, oh, whoa, like I don't know like how I feel about this anymore. And then the other person's like, whoa, this person gave me so much love, and then suddenly they're
Mm.
not giving me love anymore. So it can be disorienting. And I think the like solution to a lot of this is, well, it's like self-awareness, but also just communication. Like communicating to the person that you're with that like, hey, like I tend to do this thing, and it's like not on purpose or anything. I just it happens with my hobbies as well. Like I just like fall really fast, and like if it's ever like too much or you need some space, like let's like we can take it slower. Or if the other person's also like that. So I'm actually in my first ever ADHD relationship, and she's also like that, and we've talked about it. We're like, okay, we're just gonna enjoy it, you know. But most of my relationships before were not like was a non ADHD,
Mm.
and like it caused different problems. So I think there it's not like one is better than the other. I think my non-ADHD relationships have different problems than my current relationship. So, but that's just like a thing that is I think like just kind of like popular, the love bombing thing, to
Yeah.
talk about, I think in like the ADHD space, because it can just be a lot for everyone involved.
Yeah.
Mm.
I was gonna say, in your current relationship, you guys must get each other a lot, but then again, there's other things that come with that as well, right? With different types of relationships.
Yeah, I in all my past relationships, I didn't realize how much of like like when you're opposites, you kind of fill different roles, and
Right.
then but you also don't understand each other as much sometimes.
Yeah.
And then now it's like there's certain roles that just aren't filled that we're just both bad at. But we'll like there's more grace around it. Like when something is like
Yeah.
lost or like something isn't done, it's not as big of a deal, but also it's not done. So it's
Yeah.
like there's just different things.
Definitely.
Definitely. It's funny when you were talking about it earlier about how like that love bombing, it looks like love bombing. It's that hyper focus. And then sometimes when it wears off, it's almost like when you were saying it, it made me think of that whole conversation we have about attachment styles, where we look at like
Mhm.
anxious and avoidant. And maybe somebody is dealing with like an ADHD type picture. And here, like, we are like, oh, that's just a very avoidant person or that's a very anxious person. But it makes you realize that there's so much nuance in being a human being that is dating,
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my
right?
gosh. Yeah. It's like the most vulnerable spot where everyone's questioning everything.
Yeah.
And like the other thing I will bring up too, that's a big topic in the ADHD world is rejection sensitivity. It's called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. It's basically when you have a big reaction to either real or perceived rejection. And I think like people don't really talk enough about like the emotional side of ADHD, the like big feelings, sensitivity, all of that. And so RSD is like a big part of that. And so when you're in the beginning parts of a relationship, when you're in a friendship group, like there's so many micro moments where RSD can like put you in a really anxious spot or like maybe make you withdraw depending on how you deal with things, that people could really read in like all sorts of ways, uh, rather than it just being RSD. And so like friendship breakups, like friendship fights, like those are big topics within the ADHD community as well, and like how people deal with it and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many things that need to be talked about when it comes to ADHD because we don't talk about all of these other things a lot of the time. So I'm glad we touched on that. You have this really fun series on your Instagram of ADHD girl rules. I had a lot of fun going through them. What are your favorite ones or ones that you think are like the most important or most powerful?
Yeah, I think it really depends on what your biggest problems are. So, like, a big thing in coaching is I think people always ask me, like, oh, like, what's the one thing I should do tomorrow? And I'm like, oh, it's like really hard for me to say it without knowing what your problems are. So in general, I would like before getting into the rules, I'm such a big fan of like the diagnosis first, not diagnosis of ADHD, but like diagnosis of the problem. So like contextually, what are your goals? What are your problems? So like really having that self-awareness and reflection, either like quarterly or every year, to like understand where you want to go from a self-growth perspective before just like picking up hacks, because I think a lot of people want to pick up hacks because it kind of like feels good to like go and implement something right away,
Mm.
but it can just become like another thing where you just have like so many things and you can't remember them. But for me personally, I think one of the biggest ones for me is that I really struggle with task initiation. And so I'm really good at like getting things done when I'm like in the hyper focus, and I'm good at follow through. I am not as good at just like taking the first step. And that's pretty common with ADHDers. So I think one of my rules is like, I think it's like we don't start tasks, we enter them. So the principle behind it is basically like if you can somehow, instead of like having this big task that you need to start, like I don't know, like write a paper, you create something that's like already in motion. So one of the ways that I like to use it is like my body doubling sessions, or like starting a co-working session with a friend. And so like it's already like in motion, and you just need to like get into the thing that's in motion, rather than like you needing to be the one who like starts the motion, because I think it's so important to like make that entry point really small. And like the other neurotypical advice that people always get stuck on is like eat the frog. Like there's this advice of like when you wake up, like start with the biggest like item first, like do
Right.
a cold plunge, like all the stuff. Like that doesn't usually work for ADHDers. You're just gonna end up with this huge overwhelm of like, oh my gosh, there's this crazy frog in front of me. So like what you really need to do is like do one small thing that's like maybe a little bit fun or like just easy to do. And then once you're in the momentum, like it's moving, right? Then you can start to like tackle the frog, but you don't
Mhm.
want to actually start with the frog. So that's
Okay.
probably one of them. The other one that I talk about a lot, I'm not actually sure if it's inside of rules. All the series kind of blend together for me now.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't have bad memory, but I probably talk about in all of my series is energy accounting. So people with ADHD, like we don't respond to time in the same way that most people do, but what we respond to well is energy. So instead of being like, oh, like I need to do this, it's going to take me 2 hours, it's like there's many ways to look at it, but it could be like, okay, like this is going to take me like 4 spoons, which is spoons is like a metaphor for like the amount of energies you have in a day. And so like then from there you can be like, okay, like this is going to take a lot of spoons. 11 a.m. is usually when I'm like really high energy. Maybe I should do it there. I am very high energy after getting some sunlight. I need some more spoons. Maybe I'll go get some sun. So, like, this concept around like working around spoons rather than, or energy rather than time, is really helpful, because an hour is not an hour. Like, an hour at 11 is not an hour at 7 p.m. So,
Mm,
just using time is not often enough for ADHDers, and they don't know what other levers to pull on. And I think energy is one of the best levers and like frameworks to use. And like obviously we live in this society, we cannot abandon time, but like bringing energy on as like an additional layer, that might even be more important to you than time.
yeah, I love
Mhm.
that.
I love the whole like spoon theory. We use that a lot in like people with any chronic illness, right?
Yeah.
Because energy accounting really is such a real thing that we don't talk enough about. So I love that. I love that you use that too. You mentioned body doubling. Can you tell us what that
Yes.
is?
Yeah, I am so deep in this community. I always forget that like
That's
it's a
okay.
weird word. So body doubling is just like an ADHD word for co-working, but it's a bit wider in that it doesn't have to be work. So it's basically when you get something done in the presence of someone else, and like that social accountability makes it more likely that you follow through. So it could
Mm.
be that you can't get the dishes done, but you call a friend, and then when you're on the phone with a friend and you're like, hey, don't get off the phone with me until I finish my dishes. And then you're
Mhm.
just like yapping, yapping, yapping. And then you don't remember that you're doing the dishes are done. So that
Right.
even that in itself is body doubling. I think sometimes
Okay.
people overcomplicate what body doubling is. They're like, oh, because the way that I do body doubling is like a little bit complicated. Like my best way to do body doubling is I have this whiteboard and I'll have like a friend come over and we will set a timer. The timer will be visible. I have this whiteboard. We each have one column where we write our tasks. And then whenever we finish off a task, we'll like make a crazy sound. And like and then you just like celebrate the other person when they go like, woo, or like whatever it is. So like that's my system. I found that is like how I get the most work done. Like I can do like 45-minute chunks like back to back, like after like with a small rest in between. And then
Mhm.
within Shimmer, we also offer body doubling. So 2 to 3 times a day, there'll be like a 1 hour session. We break it into two 25-minute blocks. And so there'll be like a little clock on the side that like you visually see it go down. And then there's a little break in between, and then those just happen. So like people often say like, oh, I've got more done in this hour than I got done like the rest of the week. So there's so many
Mm.
ways to do body doubling. The other way, actually, if you just literally have yourself, that is one of my favorites, is if you're, especially if I'm doing a physical task, like if I'm building a desk or like cleaning my room, you just literally take your phone, you turn the camera time lapse on, and you like put it over there. And you are way less likely to abandon the task because you're like, oh, I'm being recorded. And I also like, you get this reward of like, oh, I get this time lapse at the end, and it always looks sick. And so if you do that,
That's so
that also
good.
is like body doubling adjacent because you're kind of body doubling yourself.
Yeah, I love
I
that.
love that idea. I think I need to try that. I've been putting
Yeah, you
off
should do
doing
it. I have a lot of time lapse, and then they end up becoming like really great B-roll as well. Like
Yes,
Yeah.
we did a
2
cleaning
for 1.
session yesterday, and I was like, oh, I have so much like random cleaning B-roll to use for this.
I love that.
I love it. So body doubling's a great one. Is there any other kind of like, I hate to use the word hacks. I know we said that earlier, but like
Strategies.
productivity, yeah. Different like tips. I know you had talked a little bit about the calendar, and I think that's such an underrated thing. I saw on your Instagram, like just literally putting things in the calendar, which is
Hmm.
actually something I just started for the first time. Like how I got through 10 years of post-secondary not using a calendar is beyond me.
Mm.
But little tips like that, I'd love to just kind of get into those.
Yeah, so the calendar is a huge one for me. I don't know how I lived with it. I also didn't really use my calendar that much. Like I remember even like during university, I had my calendar like printed on my wall, which I guess you should still do that anyways, but um and if everything I do needs to be in my calendar or else it doesn't happen. Like I literally missed
Mhm.
one of my best friends birthday party. Well, I made there eventually, but I was like an hour and a half late. But I didn't know it was happening, and I literally I text. He was like, "Where are you?" And then I was like, "Oh, you didn't send me a calendar invite." He was like, he was like, "I need to send you a calendar invite now," and I was like, "Yes." I was like, "But also, I'm really sorry. I'll be there in an hour." So I just live by my calendar, and so actually we've built that into Indie. So when you're like having your morning check in, if you say something to it, and it has a time on it, it'll auto detect it and you can like click a button and it sends it to your calendar so
Mm.
that it'll just be in there. So it's
Wow.
basically what's happening here is you are externalizing your memory. Like when you say that, like, I'm going to remember to do X, like you're probably not going to remember it. Like even if you don't have ADHD, like there's so many inputs in our world nowadays. So whether it's your calendar or sometimes I use reminders for things as well, because there's just so much stuff in my calendar. If I need like an extra reminder, I'll like put an alarm, and now all my alarms have like super weird names that are like pick up luggage, and like I still just reuse them. They all have weird names on them. So that's definitely a really big one. And then this one, it works well for me, but I know a lot of ADHDers don't like it. So again, like experiment is time boxing or time blocking. I think people call it different things, but it's basically like instead of having a really long to-do list when you start your day and you're like, okay, I'm going to get through as much as I can, you actually try to guess in like different blocks of your day, like what items are going to fit into them. And that gives you, for me, what it does is it gives me better awareness of like when I look at a list before, I'd be like, oh, I can definitely get through that in a day. And then if I don't get through it, I just move it to tomorrow and I still have no awareness. So then like at work, what would happen to be like, oh yeah, I can for sure do that. Like I can for sure add that to my plate. And then you just end up either working super late or like disappointing someone. So what time blocking does for me is that like it shows you how many blocks you have in a day for work, and I pair that with body doubling. And then if you're getting it wrong and you're like, oh, I always think that this thing is going to take me this long, but it takes me like triple as long, then you have that awareness. So like for me,
Mhm.
that's why time blocking works. But I know it doesn't work for a lot of people because they don't end up just like sticking to whatever's on the block. So I will like I'll pick a block, put things that are kind of similar together, put it into the block. And then if I need additional, I will actually like write that block onto like a sticky note and like put it on the table, because oftentimes what happens is like when we're working on something, if we see a different tab, you're like immediately doing whatever's on that tab, and like you need like a constant reminder of like, no, I'm like working on this thing here. So if I see the tab, I'm like, nope, the sticky note, this is what I'm working on.
Yeah.
So the sticky notes are also, I think, a huge hack that a lot of ADHDers love, using sticky notes for everything.
Yeah. Oh, those are such good tips. I'm definitely going to
Mhm.
use those. I know Vic knows this, but my Google Calendar, like, I don't know what I would do without her. Everything is on
Yep.
that Google Calendar. Everything. Like, if it's not there, it's not in my life. So I
Yeah,
definitely relate to
exactly.
that. um, for anyone who's listening who, maybe has ADHD or they're looking at getting a diagnosis and they're really struggling and they don't have much support and they're just looking for, support in some way, what would you want them to know?
If they don't have a diagnosis.
Maybe they just got one or maybe they
Mhm.
don't and they're just looking for some support.
Yeah, it depends on, yeah, I think the step one is definitely mapping out like where you feel like, I guess, like the goal or problem is. And so with Indie, the free app, there's a really easy way to do that. Like when you first onboard, you'll go through this exercise. It's called the storyline exercise, where you start to like envision some of the goals in your life, and then you kind of have like a 10,000 foot view of like, oh, okay, like I'm like thinking about a lot of things that are in this area of my life or the another area of my life, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe that like, oh, this is overwhelming in itself. I can't even like think that far ahead. Like you'll come to realizations as you're going through these exercises. And so I think like doing a little bit of pre-work will be helpful, because I think a lot of the times what people do is like they'll go to a coach, or they'll go to like someone who's like trying to sell them something, like you're on a consultation call and you don't know exactly what you need, and it becomes like they're trying to sell you what they think that you should need. So
Yeah.
I do think like doing a little bit of that in advance, and there's so many like free workshops that now exist with things like that. Like we do a public free quarterly one, where it's like a reflection back at the last quarter and then towards the next quarter. But there's like so many out there now that you can find like one that resonates with how you think. So I think a little bit of pre-work first, and then I would try, it depends on like where you're at in the process. Like I do strongly believe, and like why I took that first step is that like getting an ADHD coach is like just a way that you're going to fast track all of that thinking, because even if you're lost in the beginning, they'll be able to like help you think through that. But if you want to do it yourself, you can also do it with a lot of like workshop worksheets that exist out there. I think that like even on my Instagram, if you look through my freebies, there's some recordings and stuff that are there as well that you can kind of just like get kicked off. I think it's just like getting yourself into the mindset, like the self growth mindset,
Mm-hmm.
and then like getting plugged into the ADHD community as well was huge for me. Like in the beginning, just listening to podcasts, going on other creators that I really resonate with how they talk about things. I generally, depending on where you're at the process too, like, are you looking for more relating, so like people talking about their ADHD problems because you haven't met anyone else who feels that way, and like seeing that like is like really healing for you? Or are you at more of the point where like you just like want to make changes and you want like a more empowering approach. Like there's literally like a creator out there for everyone, or like multiple creators out there for everyone. So that really
Mhm.
helps as well, because then you get plugged in to the people who are like actively addressing those things.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I have to say, I just like absolutely love that you created something that does not exist. Like, I've just never heard of a program like this, and there's so many people who will benefit. So I think it's amazing. On that topic, we have a lot of clinicians that listen to our podcast. Is there anything
Mhm.
specific they need to do from a referral standpoint? Is it an app? Like, how can they share this information with their patients?
Yeah, so there's kind of two entry points into Shimmer. You can either use the free app, Indie, which you can just tell them about. You don't need to refer or anything like that.
Yeah.
Or there's Shimmer, the coaching. And so the coaching platform, we work with a ton of providers of all sorts, like psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, occupational
Mhm.
therapists, everything. So if they just go to shimmer.care/providers, there is a bunch of information about how it can augment your services, and then if you reach out to us as well, depending on like how much you know about ADHD, we actually provide a lot of clinician resources, because a lot of
Mm.
clinicians don't know, like who don't specialize in ADHD, don't really know how to talk about ADHD, like what the different solutions are, like even aside from coaching, and how to talk to someone who has ADHD, who's neurodivergent. Just depending on where you are, you can also just reach out through that portal, and we can send you some things, some resources that you can share to your patients, or you can just read up on yourself. Our lead coach put together like a massive Notion doc that just has like all these different like medication adherence for your patient with ADHD, even if it's like other medications, or like how to engage a patient who has ADHD, like how coaching or other services can augment your practice. So we have a bunch of resources there. It's all in shimmer.care/providers.
Awesome.
That's amazing. And where can our listeners follow you on Instagram? They got to see these reels that we've been watching.
Yeah, I think people usually love the series ADHD Girl Hacks. It was actually my very first series. I've been
Yeah.
meaning to redo it because I didn't really know how to edit back then. I was like, oh, these are so bad. But people really like the hacks in there. And
Yeah.
ADHD Girl Works is also a really popular one. But my handle is at ADHD.Christal. And we also have the Shimmer one, which is at shimmer.care. But they're all linked in each other's bios. So you'll
Yeah.
find, if you find one, you find all of them.
We're going to put it all in the show notes. It'll be super easy. This was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for coming on, Chris.
Yeah, no, thank you guys. This was really fun. And I'm really excited that you guys are spotlighting this topic.
Yes. Thank you so much.